Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leap. As always, it is such a pleasure to be here with my guest this week, and deep gratitude to all of you that take the time and tune in, and always hope that you or somebody that you love or somebody that you know is going through a rough time can get a little dose of hope and inspiration from our conversation. This week, I have with me Jim Padilla, and he has quite a powerful history of grief and loss and pain that has brought him to this place in time in his life. And I will just give a really brief overview before we jump right into our story. Jim grew up in foster care placement and went to the streets, ended up in prison for a couple of years for drug-related issues, and his own brother took his own life at 19. And when Jim was released at 25, he had his own wake-up call that we're going to dive into today. And now is a very successful entrepreneur. And so I am very excited to have you with us today, Jim. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you for bringing me in, Susan. Always glad to be able to offer some value and share my story.
Yeah, so let's jump right into your story. I gave a little bit of an overview, but I want to delve much more deeply into that story because I know that is what motivated you to get where you are today. So let's start with your younger formable years when you were in foster care. You ended up in jail. So share any part of that story that you'd like, and then we'll delve into what you're doing today as a result.
Well, it really started with sometimes just timing, right? The right circumstances, the wrong timing. My parents were teenagers when they had me, 16 and 17. They had no idea what they were doing. And, my father took off right away. And my mom just responded the best way she knew how. And it tended to be with just a lot of fear and rage. And I got beat all the time with ways that would be illegal today. And, I spent all of my time just trying to figure out how to make sure my mom didn't hate me, because that's what I thought what was going on. I didn't realize at that time that she was just fearful and trying to handle life. And I ended up in foster care by 13. I was on the streets by 16 in gangs, and then I was in jail by 19. And I spent so much of my time when I was at school and out of the home. I spent all the time trying to make sure everybody thought my life was normal. And then when I was at home, I spent all of my time trying to make sure that my mom thought I was living a normal life. And it's exhausting. You spend all of these years just always trying to balance the environment. And I was never taking care of me. I was always trying to read the room so that I could bend people's influence. Imagine going home, spending every waking moment figuring out, okay, how do I balance the scales so my mom doesn't get mad at me today, so I don't get hit, or so I don't get treated poorly in a foster care environment, or so I don't get taken advantage of on the streets, or so I don't put myself in the wrong situation in jail. Right? It's a skill set that I gained over my life, but it was literally force of survival. This was my survival mechanism. I just had to figure out how to bend people's influence my direction. I had to learn how do I become an asset to people? Mm-hmm. And so, I grew up in a home that didn't really have any love. There was no God in my home. I can think of 3 times ever that the words "I love you" were exchanged in our house. And I just thought my mom hated me because I didn't know why else she would do that to a kid. And so I believed I had no value and no worth. I heard the words thief and liar and loser so many times that I just, the one thing that's different is you always talk about how when you hear that stuff, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. My challenge was I hated it and I knew it wasn't me, but I didn't know what was me. So I still went down that path, spending my time just in frustration and pain and wondering, I knew there was something else that for me, I just didn't know what it was. And so that's where a lot of my frustration came growing up.
And pain, and sadness and sense of self-worth and self-esteem and all the things that we gain through that love and that stability at home that we know so many children do not have. And so I wanted to ask you, though, in those years that you were living with your mom, and it sounds like, was your dad in the home the whole time too, or did he
No, I
leave?
had several different stepdads, but no.
Okay. And I know that you had a stepbrother.
Yes.
Did you have any? No, not a stepbrother,
Half brother.
half brother. Was he growing up in the house with you, with your mother prior to foster care placement?
Well, it was interesting because we were 6 years apart. And when you're 10
Okay.
years old, 6 years is a lifetime.
Yes.
And so we had nothing in common. We had no real relationship. What I did know is, he hated when I was home, because when I was home, it was nothing but chaos, because my mother and I were always fighting. And
So you were 6 years older.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. And it just presented a lot of chaos. He resented me because I brought chaos. I resented him because my mom did show him love. And I think she learned a lot of things with me that she regretted and she didn't know how to fix, but she made sure that she didn't treat him that way. And it just made me resent him and hate her.
And just get angrier and angrier, right?
Yeah.
Especially during those adolescent years. How did you end up in foster care?
Well, it's a story that I'm not necessarily proud of, but I got in trouble when I was 13. And when I got in trouble, it was always very severe, exponential groundings, big beatings, and all of that. And I just decided I was done with it. And I got the biggest beating of my life. My mom, she liked to let you torture for a while, wonder how she was going to punish you. And I told myself, I'm not going to let her see me cry anymore. I'm not going to. So I turned off, literally that day, I turned off pain. And I said, I will not show her that she's going to hurt me. And the fact that I didn't respond when she beat me, turned into the biggest beating I ever had. And then I went and I called the sheriffs and I said, I'm abused and I need you to come and pick me up. And I didn't have any marks. They said, do you have any evidence? And I said, yeah, I have a huge knot on my head. And then I picked up a hammer and I hit myself in the head to give me the knot, so there would be evidence. And the sheriffs came, they took the knot, they saw that, they took me away, and I went to foster care. To this day, my mother and I both know that I gave myself that knot. We've never spoken about it. We don't have a relationship now, but that was how I ended up in foster care initially. And then, the journey just went from there.
I'm thinking about the desperation and the strength that it took, that self-harming. And that self-harming, was that specific to that day? Because, I know that when kids have deep pain, that self-injurious behavior can follow them for quite some time. Was that something you just did that day to get yourself the help that you needed?
As far as physical harm, yes. I did more than my share of emotional damage, harm with drugs and, thievery. And I did a lot of things to harm myself. But in terms of inflicting physical harm, that was the only time.
All right. So now you're in foster care, and I have a feeling you're going to tell us that did not go very well. So talk to us, and please just share what you're comfortable with. I'm just trying to really help people to understand this journey, just the depth of pain that you were in, and how you have taken that pain to really impact so many lives. So just share what you feel comfortable with.
Well, I've been blessed to have a lot of environments and opportunities. I speak on a lot of stages and I share. So I've been able to share the story with a lot of people. So I'm comfortable with that. The thing is, when my foster care experience was short-lived. It was less than a year, but I was in a family that it wasn't spectacular, but it wasn't like a lot of the horror stories that you live. But I was 13 and I had a foster brother who was a 16-year-old football player, wrestler, and he just didn't like me. I was not his ideal cup of tea. Nobody wants a 13-year-old instant little pain in the butt brother to have to deal with. And it wasn't easy to deal with. And there were several times where he, just literally picked me up and threw me across the room and, because manhandled me because he could. And to me, it just wasn't worth fighting for. And I think the biggest thing that happened is when the day when I got that beating, when I told you I turned off the pain, I literally turned off the ability to feel. And so for the next decade of my life, I didn't have a conscience. I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel love. I didn't feel anything. I was just scorched earth. And so I was all about just preserving myself. So I lied, cheated, steal. I did everything I could to take advantage of people so that I was going to be okay, because that's the only way I had to make sure I was taken care of. And it put me in a position to, be dealing drugs and running with gangs in the streets, running with people that I knew I shouldn't have been, but I just didn't know what else to do. So I just kept trying to further this journey of making sure Jim's going to be okay. And then, ended up by the time I was 25, I was in jail twice. I'd been divorced twice, bankrupt twice. I mean, I lived a whole lot of living in 25 years. And it was just a lot of grief. And one of the pieces in there was when I was 25, my brother was 19, and we had no relationship growing up because we were just too far apart. And then once I was always out of the house, the only way I could really connect with him was through my mother, and that just wasn't going to happen. So once he started driving at 16, he started coming over to my apartment and stuff, and we started having some small sense of relationship. And it was the first time I really found my brother. And he was very much into guns. One of our stepdads, his father was very much an outdoorsman. He got us into guns and things. And he had all kinds of weapons. And to this day, I say it's a self-inflicted wound because I can't say it was suicide because I don't believe it. He was actually in a place where he was rebounding his life. I got in trouble because I did what I wanted to. He got in trouble because he did what everybody else wanted to, but we still ended up in the same spots. He ended up in juvenile hall because he did something stupid. But he was rebounding his life. He was on the way to getting his EMT certification. He was a volunteer firefighter. He was my hero at that point because I was doing nothing right. He was doing things well. And he got in an argument. He was drunk, got in an argument with his girlfriend. She was going to leave. He stepped in front of the car and said, "You better not go or I'll shoot myself." And I swear to this day, I don't believe that he meant that. I think it was just stupid drunk activity. And then next thing
the gun went off.
He was dead before he hit the ground.
Oh,
and my
God,
frustration
Jim.
was that was when I just started having my brother, and then he was gone.
So let's back up for just a few minutes here. So, I mean, just a few steps back from your story. So you were in foster care for a year. Did you run out? Did you run away? Is that what happened? Did you leave your foster care placement and go to the streets?
Yeah, I made it clear to them that my biggest challenge was I made it clear I wasn't going to work with the system. Because we were
Okay.
supposed to go to counseling once a week. I felt like it was a waste of time because there was nobody in counseling who was trying to help me. They felt like they were all trying to fix me. Every day was, well, why are you doing this? And how do you do it better? I'm like, does anybody care what I think? You guys want to, do you want to ask if this was actually truth or my fault? Or I just felt like they weren't there to help me at all. So I just played the system and I didn't cooperate. And they just said, look, this isn't going to work if you aren't going to work it. And so they said, you can go back home. And I was like, I'm not going home. I'm hitting the road.
And, being in the field for as long as I have, and I've seen a lot of things. And I told you earlier that I did a lot of volunteer work in the prison system and the juvenile justice system, and the gaps, just the tremendous, profound holes and gaps we have in our community to help people be successful. And we wonder, kids, they've grown up, they've been beaten, they've been abused, they've had to survive on the street. They have foster care placements, and that can be a horrific, and they can get, just re-traumatized. And yet somehow we expect that these kids, when we say, hey, get your life together, that we expect somehow miraculously that they all of a sudden have all the answers. Their trauma has disappeared. And now that they can go ahead and they can turn their life around. And I know you're going to tell us your story, and I cannot wait. But before we get there, going back to your brother, so you were in and out of jail. Where did you land? Where were you living when this horrific tragedy happened with your brother? What was going on in your own life at that point?
I was getting ready. I was in the process of ending my second marriage. So it was, and actually the only reason that marriage extended at all was because we were in the process of terminating it. The night that then my brother, I got a phone call from my mother's friend that said Danny had taken his life. And me and my wife at the time, we actually decided that we wanted to have another baby and we name it after my brother, with somehow this was going to fix our marriage. And all it did was give us another child who was going to be in a broken home. But I went through, I was like, what do I need to do to get any kind of a break? Because I thought that it was one of the few points where I started feeling some belonging and some, I had my brother because we didn't have him before that. And then it was gone. I was like, well, at this point, I just got to worry about taking care of me because clearly I felt like I had no business taking care of anybody else. I had already failed 2 marriages. I already, I blew my finances. I did everything wrong. So I was like, okay, I walked away from the marriage and just said, I have nothing. I literally walked away with nothing. I had a furnished apartment because I owned nothing. I left I was like, I just need to be on my own. I never want to be married. I don't want to deal with children. I can't be anything. I just got to go.
Were you
And
working at this point? Like, how were you taking
yeah,
care of yourself?
I was in the process at that time of starting to, have my first real jobs, because everything before that was dealing drugs and, making illegal
Hmm.
money. Made a lot of money, but not legally. My challenge was, even though I was doing all this stuff with minimal feeling, I still had conscience around it. There was something inside of me that knew that this was wrong. I just didn't know how to do it right.
And
And
so what happened inside of you when your brother died? Because you had said that you had built up this persona and also kind of shut yourself off. I mean, you had one trauma after another, and that was just survival mode. You're going to put a barrier around you. You're not going to care. You're not going to, but yet you did still have a conscience, whatnot. What happened when you lost your brother?
well, when I lost my brother, I started recognizing that there was parts of me. I felt guilty, because I felt if anybody should have been lost, it should have been me and not him, because he was trying to rebuild his life. And at that point, I had not taken any great measures to do so. And so I started recognizing that, there were things that I had to start doing differently. Shortly after that, was driving down street in Sacramento, and a guy pulled in front of me, and I had to slam on my brakes, because I was speeding, but I slammed on my brakes, and I followed him into this 7-Eleven parking lot, and I was ready to kill him. And I dragged him out of his truck, and he came at me, and I, smashed his face off the hood of his car. And in that moment, I had snapped like into reality, and I was like, I can go to prison for this. And I jumped in my car and took off. And I said, I got to do this differently. Something has to be different. And I didn't know what, but I had to do different.
And because you had already been in prison twice, right?
Yeah.
Like, were you on probation at this point, or?
I felt like I was always on probation.
Right.
Because if it wasn't for that, then I was also on probation for child support, because I was missing payments I felt like I was perpetually on probation. And so every time I was doing something, I was violating a probation. And so I was in and out of, I spent many different weekends in jail, get arrested on a Thursday, get out on a Monday, stuff like that. And it was always for that kind of thing. And I managed to find a way to usually manipulate things to my favor, so they would give me another chance. And, I think people, they felt a little bit of pity or sympathy at the moment, because I just couldn't get out of my own way. But I wasn't destroying people. I wasn't like a violent gang banger like that. I was just a dumb kid making bad decisions all the time.
Well, and it sounds like something happened though when you were beating this person. I mean, did something shift inside of you when you I always call it the aha moment or the wake up call. I remember seeing this medium once. All my listeners know I love mediums. And she said, we all have a cancer moment at some point in our life. For some, it might come on their deathbed, but at some point we have a cancer moment. And so just for my listeners, what I mean by that, it's our own wake up call that we have this finite amount of time on the planet. What do we want to do with our life? And sometimes, like I said, that can be on a deathbed when we awaken to the beauty of why we're here.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that was your moment, or
it was definitely a benchmark moment, for sure. Because it's one of those ones you just recognize it. Again, I didn't know what to do. I just knew that I could no longer do that. Like I have to, basically, I fought my way through the first 25 years of my life. I was fighting everybody and everything. And from that point forward, I started recognizing that I can no longer fight people. I have to start fighting for people. I don't know. I still knew there was something inside of me. God had a purpose for me here. I didn't know God at the time. But now looking back over all of this was God's hand on me throughout it. And once I started focusing on me becoming a better person and me figuring out how can I serve, how do I become something more, that's when, things started opening up. Within a year later, I met my wife. And the most incredible thing about her to start with, I mean, she's amazing in more ways than I can count. But when she met me, I literally had nothing. Nothing. I had a furnished apartment. I had a Geo Metro 3-cylinder piece of crap car. I literally had nothing. I had nothing to offer the world. And she was a successful, accomplished woman with, doing great things and a great career. And she chose me. And it made me feel, it was the first time that I felt like I actually had value. That because I had no material possession. I had nothing to own. She saw something in me that was worth taking a risk on.
Mm.
So that she was the first person that taught me that I actually could be loved.
It makes me so emotional. It's pretty powerful because I think sometimes if we have deep self-loathing or we don't see our own sense of self-worth, that sometimes the first glimpse we get of that is seeing love through somebody else's eyes for us, right? And I think that's the power. We always talk about unconditional love because I think that unconditional love has to start with self, and when we can see that and feel that and let that in from somebody else, I think it waters that seed in our soul that we can see ourselves other than this narrative that brought us
Right.
to that point in time.
Right. Yeah, that's what it takes. I mean, there's no way you could do this stuff on your own. I mean, God shows up in many ways, and it's he speaks to us through many people and circumstances. And just the fact that I'm still here, because so many points along the way, I could have just been dead, done, and so now when I look back on it, it's like, well, he kept me around because he had work for me to do. And
So
that's always the story, right?
yeah, well, let's venture into your work. So you meet your wife and the second half of your life begins, it sounds like. So talk to us about that because I know you're doing some really cool things, and I would love for you to share that part of your path.
Yeah, thank you. Cyndi and I moved into this. It was just a very trusting relationship because we saw each other that there was something here that we can pursue. And I don't know that either one of us knew what it was. She came out of a divorce. I came out of a divorce. Ironically, I was not drinking or smoking, or I had no vices aside from just, I guess, being a criminal at the time. But, I wasn't, she came out of an alcoholic marriage, and I didn't do that. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I didn't have any of those things, those particular vices. So, and mostly I just loved her and her three daughters so when I came in, her daughters were 3, 5, and 7. And they've been my daughters for, 30 years since. And I just started leaning into how do I show up as the man that is deserving and worthy of this life that I'm stepping into, because I couldn't believe that I actually had another redemption opportunity here. And, as we started rolling shortly thereafter, we wanted to find another way to, how else do we do this? Because it's hard raising great kids. And so we knew we needed some more support and structure for them. So we said, let's find a church. And we walked into a church, ironically, on a Sunday, had a great, interesting message about where do you go and what are you going to do when you die and how do you know? And then literally that Tuesday, the towers were hit and watched thousands of people die. Oh. And I went to church that next Sunday and raised my hand and said, I now need to know where I'm going to go when I die. And so from that point on, I have a very obsessive and addictive personality. So I was that on fire Christian that was going to convert everybody and doing, Bible study and serve in the church and serve on every committee and do everything because I was just all in gung ho. But, I kind of fast tracked a lot of years worth of figuring out, what is my mission here and how do I do it and what do I do? And so I was always an entrepreneur. I had started several different businesses. My wife and I went through some growth and struggles because I was growing up. That was when I was just really learning how to be a man because I knew nothing. And I was trying to figure out how do I be the man that can lead my wife, serve these people. And, I was a really very young, immature, emotionally, mentally. Well, I am worldly because I lived through all these battle wounds and scars, but I kind of stopped growing as a boy. So I was now starting to pick that up again and become this, adolescent at 25, 27, 30. But I started, I learned a lot through growing businesses, which is something I highly recommend people do. You learn so much about yourself as an entrepreneur. You learn the things you do well, the things you don't. You learn what are your gifts that you can bring. You learn how you can really impact people. I recommend it for everybody, even if you just have a side hustle. Everybody should have a business. The Bible says we need to work. It doesn't say we need to have a job. So work can be anything you call it. So have a purpose that you can be of service to people.
And I always say, that when you follow the true calling of your heart and that it never feels like work, it feels like play.
yeah, when you're in that flow, right? It's all being in service. But there was a whole lot of things that happened. It's just, we wouldn't have time to go into all of them, but essentially, I was in mortgage. Cyndi and I got into a spot where I was doing things that I shouldn't have with money and making some bad investments. We ended up splitting up because I cost us the bankruptcy in some homes, that we were dealing with, and we had to split up for a while, and then I really just got on my knees with God, and she saw me over the course of 18 months just become a self-sustaining, successful entrepreneur, being of service, becoming the man that she knew that I was capable of and that she deserved, quite honestly. And we got back together, but it was under new terms. It was like, okay, if we're going to do this, we're doing everything together. There's no more separate funds and finances. There's no more separate life, because I was the entrepreneur. She was the stable breadwinner. So I could, she paid the bills with her income. I gave us all the extras. So this put us in a place where we were doing this all as one together.
Which says so much about the two of you. I mean, and the power of love ultimately, but it took two of you to meet each other in that center. She could have walked away and said, adios, good luck, hope you, do well in your life. You could have also put up your defenses. And it took, I can imagine it took a lot of work for the two of you to kind of put your boxing gloves down. And it's just a metaphor that I use when two people are like, but for the two of you, the love between you prevailed, right? But it also took this tremendous courage to each of you to put your egos aside as well, and the hurt and all the things that come with the breakup and the betrayal and these other things that happen within marriages. And so what was that process like? Because I can imagine, given your history, wanting to default of putting your, armor back on and protecting yourself, because here you're being triggered of another, oh my God, I'm a loser. I don't know that this was actually happening for you, but I'm imagining the self-talk that comes with something like this. I really would love for you to share how the two of you were able to come together and rebuild the trust in the marriage. That would have been an easy thing for either one of you to walk away from.
Yeah. Well, ironically, this all happened my 40th year, right? So I basically spent the first 40 wandering in the wilderness, in the desert. And this was my 40th year was the year that I got on my face before God. I was a Christian before that, but this was when I really started building a relationship. I was like, okay, God, I give this all to you because I clearly have no clue how to do this right. And so I need you to lead me. I surrender to you. And this was the first time that I actually surrendered. So, okay, why am I here? What am I doing here? How do you want to use me? And I was on a journey for 18 months. I got an apartment. I didn't buy anything. I bought no pictures. I had a patio set for my living room. I did not want to enjoy my apartment. I wanted to be reminded every single day why I was there. And so I was constantly in this state of development and grief and healing and growth. And all I kept telling her was, just don't make any permanent decisions. I didn't want to start dating somebody, because then all of a sudden now you start moving in a different direction. I was like, just do what you need to do. You take as much time as you need to, but don't move in an opposite direction. Let's see what we can do. I didn't want any promises of anything more than that, just that she wasn't going to do anything permanent. And, we still had a relationship. We talked, we met, but it was, she was still involved enough because we were still raising girls together. And she had the opportunity to just see more of who I was becoming. And the one thing that we recognized in this was a transition time for me to start becoming the man of the family, because at this point she was still the breadwinner. And what happened was I stepped up, and she said, okay, good. I get to be the woman now. I get to be the wife. I get to be the queen, and I let you be the one take care of everything. And, it was interesting because given how we split up, and it was all about money and the fact that she couldn't count on me, which was the biggest problem. When we got back together, then she shortly, that next, I think a couple of months later, she was a retail management, and they were coming into Black Friday, which is a crazy time of the year. And she was done. She's like, I don't want to work another Black Friday. And she sat me down, and I remember that it was November 13th, 2013. It was getting ready to step into their last Black Friday. She said, I'm asking for your blessing. I want to retire. I'm going to walk right up. I'm going to get the store ready and then I'm done. I'm not going to work Black Friday and I'm retiring from that industry. And all I remember was sitting in the chair going, don't show fear. Right? Don't show fear. Don't let, because I was terrified. I'm like, what are you talking about? You've been the breadwinner while I've been figuring stuff out. And what that told me in that moment was she now fully trusts me. Right.
How long did it take the two of you to rebuild to the point where you came back together living under the same roof as a
That was it was 18 months.
18 months? Okay.
Did not happen overnight. Felt like 18 years.
Wow. I'm so happy for you. All right. So now she says, okay, I'm all done with
He's done with her
retail.
career. And
Yep.
now she's going to jump in and then figure out what a life of an entrepreneur is. And we jumped into business together. And I always had the creative. I'm the visionary. I'm the innovator. I'm the idea person. But she's got this organizational grounding force in her that started making it all to go together. Because I had ideas and business stuff, and then some did well, some did not. But then together we were like, okay, how do we actually build something? And then we stepped in and we now have this business that's an outsourced sales organization, and companies hire us to plug in as their sales team. We've got hundreds of salespeople all around the world and networks, and it's a multi-million-dollar business. And we've been doing all these great things. But then, and I've been pouring myself deeper into ministry. And, my big challenge that I have, I am very frustrated with America in general. I'm a patriot. I love America. The world in general has issues, but I get frustrated watching this country that's underachieving because it's so caught up in its own mess. And we look to the government and we look to corporate America to solve our problems, and that's not going to solve it. We can't rely on the government. We can't rely on corporate America. We got to rely on each other. We got to rely on entrepreneurs, who problem solvers and risk takers, and people who are going to be on the ground, boots on the ground, doing work, serving other people. And so I have a huge heart for entrepreneurs, and more specifically, I have a heart for men. I watch, being in prison and being around prisons, I watch so many men who have a huge heart to serve and want more, and a massive limit because they feel like they're underused and they feel like they're never going to live up to their potential. And, there are so many great men on the inside of prisons that most people will never get to meet. And if you ever do, they're awesome men, some of the greatest entrepreneurs, some of the biggest loving human beings. And they made a mistake when they were 16 or 25 or 27 or whatever. And now they're 45 and 50 years old and they're still on the inside, only they're not that guy anymore.
And talk about pain and grief and loss under one roof. And we wonder why, where we take these people who have had so much trauma and so much pain, and we wonder why they fight and get angry. And we know the issue between gangs, in prisons. But when you start, we don't have time to go into why gangs form in the first place, but really it is a family for these kids on the streets, and a way for them to watch each other's backs and take care of each other. And it's not because these human beings that came together in gang were deviant. It was a way of survival. And that is also true within the prison system. I get emotional because I talked to you before. They're one of my favorite populations, and the people that need that sense of feeling loved the most because of the way society sees them. And I think about, even when they get out, it's so hard for them to get a second chance. So
it is. Well, my wife and I refer to them as the throwaway society, and that includes teens, aged out foster teens, inmates, ex-cons, because if you have to choose and you can rank them all, those are like the last people chosen. You want to help people. You want to adopt puppies, cute puppies. You want to adopt cute little kids. Nobody wants a 15-year-old punk kid to come into their home. Nobody, we talk about, let's help the ex-cons, inmates, but really, does anybody want to give them a job, or they just get to work at an auto mechanic, right? Or pouring concrete stuff. And like I said, there's just so many people. They've been on this journey. They regret it. They're 10, 20, or 30 years removed from the mistakes that they made. And to a man, and I'm only speaking to the men's side, because that's the side of the inmates that I've spent time in, but almost with zero exception, they're fatherless, they're addicted, and they were young. I mean, these are the things that we have to solve. We have to have good quality male role models in homes, start taking care of people. I don't want to make a big political statement, but I'm not a fan of all of the Planned Parenthoods that exist, and primarily for this reason. There's too many young girls, whatever you want to call it, women's health or whatever you put the word in it, way too many, when there's millions and hundreds of thousands and millions of babies being killed, of teenage girls that have to go in and make that decision. That shouldn't have to happen. So, you can protest outside of a Planned Parenthood, or you can focus on raising up better kids, being better role models, being better leaders, showing these kids that this is not how they have to express themselves. This is not the risk that they have to take, and teaching young men to take better responsibility, and teaching young women to have so much value in themselves that they don't have to just give themselves away to kids, guys. And that's just one of many issues, but we can solve that. You take the man, the American man, the Christian American man specifically, start being the leaders and the role models and the men that God called us to be. We can heal a lot of things and fix a lot of wrongs in this country, instead of doing what's comfortable and what's easy and going with the flow. And the inmates that I deal with and work with are the same thing. They crave purpose. They get out of prison. On the inside, they get financial counseling, they get drug rehab, they get emotional counseling, they get Bible study, they have all kinds of support. And then they get out, they have none of that. And they're trying to adapt to a whole new world with no support, no purpose, no meaning. So all of a sudden they got to find some way to make money. So they start stealing. They start
Exactly, or selling drugs.
Again.
Exactly. And not every prison offers all of those things either, right? I mean, that really is very dependent upon some prisons are much more progressive than others, as we know. But I agree with you. The gap, and I was thinking as you were talking, I made a note to myself, because I've talked about this before, that, as human beings, we're the only ones that have to pay for our mistakes over and over and over and over. I mean, I don't care if we were 18 and now now you're 70. It's like everyone remembers what you did when you were 18. It's like, how are we supposed to learn how to forgive ourselves and move on when we have all of the reminders of people that won't let us forget? We don't, won't give us that second chance, etc. But something that you're talking about also near and dear to my heart is knowing this in juvenile justice, that if you get these kids that end up in juvie, and then they end up back in the same environment from where they came, where their parents have drug and alcohol addictions, these kids are being abused, how do we expect a different outcome? Where are the supports within the community, etc.? So tell me what you are doing. What are you guys doing to help fill that gap between transitioning from prison back into the community?
Well, I'm in the process of launching a ministry called Men in Action, MIA. It's about taking men who are missing in action and helping them become men in action, get on the front lines and start making the change in community. And one of the ways that we do that is we are building call centers in downtown communities where prisons exist, so that when the ex-cons come out, they have a place that they can go work, learn a skill, earn money. Sales is about business and making money. They can make money so they won't have to go do anything illegal to get it. Right. So then they'll also have purpose, because they're helping companies and businesses grow. So they'll feel worthy, so that they're not, that's the other part of the reason they turn to crime is or in gangs, is because you don't feel worthy. So you get your worthiness by your positioning in a gang and with the community. Right. So then we surround them with other people like themselves, because too many times, if you're the only person like yourself, then you're the sore thumb. He's the ex-con guy. That's the guy. Nobody wants to be that guy, right? So you surround them with other people who are also on the journey of rehabilitating and getting themselves better. And if you work 40 hours in the week, we basically take 1 hour a day in programming. So one of those days a week, you're spending time in drug rehab. You're spending time in financial planning, spending time in Bible study. We're rebuilding the men from the inside out, so that they have worth, meaning, purpose, opportunity. And our whole mission is to reduce the recidivism rate. Instead of 76% of men coming out, going back in, we want 76% of them to stay out and be contributing members of society.
I love that. So are you connected to the volunteers at a prison system? Like, how do you get these guys when they're coming out of prison? Like, is there a transitional plan where
I'm
you're working.
finding out more and more that there's even more ways to catch them before they come out and start preparing. I was just we're in Nashville right now. We're actually getting ready to move back to California, but here there's a Tennessee prison ministry, outreach ministry. They get you going in to teach the guys. So I can go and teach them sales skills before they even come out, and they can start getting on this path of skill set and redemption, and start having a plan so they have something to look forward to when they get out, instead of just hoping to find something. Right. And so there's like I said, all different prisons, different outreach ministries. There's so many organizations that have great intentions and great ideas. We just need people to pull them all together so that they can all work as one powerful entity to really serve these guys, get them skill sets on the inside, rehabilitate them powerfully, and then put them in environments to be of purpose and impact when they come out.
Mm.
How that alone will reduce the reason, the need, and the cause for them to need to do something that they don't want to do.
Absolutely. And I know we're coming to the top of the hour and we're going to have to wind down here, but I wanted to ask you, how about the men that are transitioning back into their homes? The ones that might have, they may have been in prison for quite some time and now their children are adolescents. Maybe they were in prison when that child was 5 and they've got to reintegrate into that. Is there any support to help these families reacclimate to this transition?
There is every prison system that I know of has a program that will help address that, but it takes the people around the inmates or the ex-cons, because too many times they're not equipped to do that on their own. They need support. They need people to have just tons of grace, tons of opportunity. You've been colored. Your eyes have been colored. You've watched this person on the inside for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and now all of a sudden you have to watch them become something new, but your whole concept of them is something else. So it requires the surrounding and supporting group, if they will allow them to have the surrounding, because a lot of times they don't want them to go back to the environments they were in. So you have to start anew, which is crazy. How is somebody supposed to, you got to give them every opportunity to succeed as possible, instead of just being punitive with everything.
Absolutely. I don't know if you track this at all, but what's the success rate of the programs that you're offering them to reduce recidivism? Because, we know that some end up breaking their parole and whatnot and going back in. Do you track that? Are you keeping any data?
We're still too new in our execution of it. We're mostly in planning phases right now. And we have, just isolated individuals that we're working with. We don't have physical calls. The call centers are in process now. I just know that knowing the arc of humans and the psychology and the structure, it's like thoughts become things, environments affect thoughts, right? We hold our thoughts captive to Christ. Like, we are directly in control of how that can go. And if there's no system and process and structure to ensure that those steps are being taken, there's no way they're going to be taken, and the failure is imminent. But when we go the opposite, everything is possible. And I'm a case study. I'm it. I mean, I am the ultimate overcomer, but I'm not anything unique. I just knew I made a physical choice when I was young, because I knew I could have been the victim. I could have easily said it was all because of my mom and it was all because of my dad. But instead, I knew what I was doing was wrong, and what I was doing was my own choice, which meant I had to make different choices. I know that's not how most people think. They just need environment and support so they can see that, so they can start thinking that way.
Well, I have so many questions, so many more questions I want to ask you, but I know that we have to wind down. So I'm going to end with the question I always end with, and I can't wait to hear particularly your answer to this, given your life story. But what does self-love look like for you now? What does it mean to you to love yourself?
Self-love for me is about forgiveness and grace. It's understanding that if you're still alive, you still have purpose, right? As long as I'm not dead, God's not done. And every single thing that I've done to this point that led me to the man I am today is exactly how it's supposed to be. So I just need to love the process. You got to forgive everything that's happened, and forgive everyone along the way, because without them, I wouldn't be who I am today.
Thank you so much for your time. Can you tell people where they can find you, your website? We'll have all of this in the show notes, but I just love for those who might be driving or whatnot for us, just tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, I have a personal website, jimp360.com, JIMP360.com. You can find out more videos about me, find stuff about our ministry, find my businesses, my podcasts, just find me on all my social medias. Just that's the beginning place of building a relationship with me. And when you get there, hit the contact button and shoot me a text message and say hello. Let me know you found me on the podcast here, and I'd love to get to know you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us and the work that you're doing in the world. And I want to thank my listeners for tuning in. And like I said, I hope you get something that helps you today and lifts you up. And I appreciate and love you guys. And I'll see you here next week. Bye for now.